In ancient Japan, there lived a farmer and his wife, and they had many children. The youngest child's name was Seishu. Now every day the farmer and his wife and all the children went to the rice fields to work in the rice paddies, for that is how they earned their living. And little Seishu would go along with them. Now Seishu would work alongside his brothers and sisters and his parents, but he was young and frail and weak, and so as often as not you could see little Seishu sitting beside the rice paddies, drawing in the dirt, for that is what he liked to do most of all. He would draw the snow-capped mountains, he would draw the birds and flowers and trees, and he would draw his family working in the rice fields. But what he liked to draw most of all was cats. Cats, 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 cats eating, sleeping, jumping, leaping, cats, 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 cats fighting, biting, howling, yowling, cats, cats, cats. Now when times were good, his parents would buy him some rice paper on which to draw his cats. And once, when times were very good, his parents bought little Seishu a round hollow stick of stone and a stick of ink that he could grind into the inkstone, and a fine bamboo brush with horse-haired bristles in which to draw his pictures. And once, times were very bad. They say that all of Japan was held by a spell. A rat goblin was swallowing all the snow and all of the rain, and so there was a famine upon the land. When the snow would fall in the winter, the rat goblin would swallow it before it had a chance to fall upon the snow-capped mountains. And when the spring came, there was very little water to trickle down into the rice fields. And when the tiny, tender shoots of rice came up, they say that the rat goblin ate those tender shoots of rice, and so there was very little harvest that fall. And so the people went to bed hungry, and there was not enough food for the winter. And little Seishu, who was young and frail and weak, did not have enough to eat, and his parents were afraid that he might not make it through the winter. And so his parents decided to take him to a nearby village where they might find a temple, and there maybe the priest would take him in and teach him to be a priest, and he would be taken care of. They wrapped his few belongings into a blanket, and they walked for 3 days until they came to a nearby village. And when they came to the temple, they knocked on the door, and pretty soon the paper screen door slid aside, and they were greeted by a kindly old priest. Seishu's parents said, "Please, please, we are poor farmers. We hardly have enough food for ourselves. Our little son is young and weak and frail. We are afraid he might not make it through the winter. Please take him in. Teach him to be a priest. He is a good boy. He will do whatever you say." The old priest asked Seishu some questions, and when he answered them correctly and quickly, the old priest saw that Seishu was also a bright boy, and so he agreed to take him in. Seishu said goodbye to his parents, and then he followed the old priest into the temple. The old priest led Seishu to a small room where he unwrapped his blanket and put away his few possessions. And he took his prized possessions, his inkstone and his inkstick and his brush, and he hid them under his blanket. And then he went out to talk to the old priest, and the old priest said, "Seishu, you will have to work hard. You will have to sweep the floors of the temple clean. You will have to work alongside of the priests, for we work in the rice fields too, and that is how we make our food and how we make our living. And when the priests go to prayer at night, you must pray alongside us." Seishu promised to be good, and indeed he was. He worked very hard, sweeping the floors of the temple clean, working in the rice fields, and going to prayers. He was so exhausted at night that he did not have time to think about drawing. But then, early one morning, he woke up with this urge to draw. All of the other priests were sleeping in their beds, and so Seishu took out that hollowed out stone. He took his ink stick and he ground some ink into the ink stick, added a little bit of water, and then he took his brush and he began to paint all over the temple floors. And what did he draw but cats? Cats, cats, cats. Cats eating, sleeping, jumping, leaping. Cats, cats, cats. Cats fighting, biting, howling, yowling. Cats, cats, cats. And when the priests woke up that morning and they came into their temple room, they saw all over their floor cats. Who did this, they said. This must not be. But Seishu said nothing. Many more weeks passed. Seishu worked hard. He swept the floors of the temple clean. He worked alongside the priests in the rice fields. And when they went to prayers, he went to prayers too. He was too tired at night to think about drawing. But then again, early one morning, when the priests were still sleeping, Seishu took out his ink stick and his ink brush and his inkstone, and he ground the ink stick into the inkstone, and he added a little bit of water, and he began to draw. And this time he drew all over the temple walls. And what did he draw but cats? Cats, 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 cats eating, sleeping, jumping, leaping, cats, 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 cats fighting, biting, howling, yowling, cats, cats, cats. And again, when the priests woke up that morning and they came into their temple, they saw all over their walls cats. Who did this, they said. This cannot be. But again, Seishu said nothing. Many more weeks passed. Seishu swept the floors of the temple clean. He worked in the rice field, then he went to prayers. He did not think about drawing. But early one morning, he woke up with that urge to draw. He took out his ink stick and his inkstone and his brush, and he began to draw. But this time, when the priests awoke, they didn't notice anything unusual. Seishu swept the floors of the temple clean, like he usually did, and he worked alongside the priests in the rice fields. But that evening, when the priests came in and they opened up their books to pray, there they saw cats. Cats, 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 cats eating, sleeping, jumping, leaping, cats, 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 cats fighting, biting, howling, yowling, cats, cats, cats. Who did this, said the priest. This cannot be, this must not be. And the old priest looked at Seishu and said, Seishu, was it you that have drawn all over our walls and our floors and our prayers books? And Seishu said that, yes, it was he. And the old priest said, Seishu, it is obvious you are meant to be an artist and not a priest. You can no longer stay here. You will have to go. Seishu went back to his small room, and he took his few belongings and he wrapped them in the blanket, and then he went out to say goodbye to the old priest. The old priest took him to the door, and as Seishu left, he said, Seishu, you have been a good boy. You have worked hard. And so as you leave, I will give you a piece of advice. Avoid large places at night. Stay to small spaces. Seishu didn't know what the old priest meant, but he bowed and he thanked the old priest, and he left the temple. But he did not go back toward his own village, for he knew that the rat goblin still held a spell all over Japan, and he would not be able to go home. They would not have enough food to feed him. And so he walked in the opposite direction. He walked toward the next village. He thought that maybe if he worked hard, if he didn't think about drawing, maybe they would take him in and teach him to be a priest. He would work very hard. And so he walked for 3 days until he came to the next village. And when he got there, all of the people had a worried, pinched look upon their face. They scurried in all different directions. When Seishu tried to stop them, they would not stop to talk to him. Finally, Seishu stopped an old woman. He said, please, please, can you tell me where I might find the temple? I wish to find work there. And the old woman looked at Seishu and said, if you will go out of the village, up on top of that hill, there is a temple. But let me give you some advice. Avoid large places at night. Stay to small spaces. Seishu thanked the old woman. And then he walked out of the village, up and up and up the hill, and it was late in the afternoon when he finally got to the top of the hill, and there was the temple. As Seishu walked toward the door, he noticed that the grounds were littered with trees and leaves and pieces of small paper. And then as he walked toward the door, he noticed that the paper screen door was torn. I will work hard. I will sweep the grounds clean, he said. I will fix the paper door. They will let me stay. I will work hard. And Seishu knocked on the door, but there was no answer. He knocked again, and there still was no answer. So he slid aside the paper screen door, and he walked inside. There was no one there. Well, Seishu was so exhausted from his day of walking that he decided to spend the night in the old temple. And he unwrapped his blanket and he lay down and closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but he was so tired from that long walk that he could not fall asleep. And so he opened his eyes and he looked around the room, and he noticed on the side of the room were several large white paper screens. Seishu had never seen screens so white and pure before. And of course, seeing those paper screens made him think of drawing. He took out his ink stick and his inkstone, and he took out his brush, and he began to draw all over those beautiful white paper screens. And what did he draw but cats? Cats, cats, cats. Cats eating, sleeping, jumping, leaping. Cats, cats, cats. Cats biting, biting, howling, yowling. Cats, cats, cats. And when he was done, Seishu stepped back and he looked at the cats that he had drawn. Why, they were the most beautiful cats he had ever drawn. They looked so real, they looked as if they could jump off of those screens and down in front of Seishu. Seishu bowed to the cats. And then he lay back down in his blanket and closed his eyes. But as he closed his eyes, he remembered the warning of the old priest and the old woman. Avoid large places at night. Stay to small spaces. Seishu opened his eyes again. He looked around, and he was in a very, very large room. And so he looked around, and he finally found a cupboard on the side of the room. He slid aside the cupboard doors, and he pulled himself in with his blanket and wrapped himself in his blanket, and pretty soon he fell asleep. Around midnight, he woke up. He heard a sound, a strange sound. It sounded like something was scratching and sniffing and squeaking. At first, it was very faint. At first, he could hardly hear it, but then it came closer and closer to the cabinet where he was hiding, where he was trying to sleep. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The noise got closer and closer. It got louder and louder. Seishu pushed himself back against the wall of the cupboard. He closed his eyes. He hardly breathed. He was so afraid. And then suddenly, there was a scream, and one long claw pierced the paper screen of the cupboard and tore down that paper. Seishu closed his eyes, and then there was a tremendous screaming and a thrashing and a dashing and howling and yowling. There was a terrible noise. Seishu covered his ears. And then just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. It was quiet in the temple. But Seishu was too terrified to move. He did not open up the paper door of his cupboard until the first light of morning crept through the window. And then he pushed aside that paper screen door to his cupboard, and he looked outside, and at first he couldn't see anything. So he crawled out of the cupboard, and he looked around the temple, and there, on the temple floor, was a huge, giant rat. It was torn, broken, bleeding, and dead. The rat goblin. Who killed the rat goblin, Seishu wondered. And then he noticed on the screens where he had drawn the cats the night before, from the mouths of each of those cats hung rat flesh and blood. The cats had come alive during the night, and they had killed the rat goblin and saved Seishu's life. Seishu bowed to the cats and thanked them. And then he wrapped up his blanket and his belongings, and he left the temple. As he left the temple, there was a fine mist falling from the sky, and Seishu knew that the spell had been broken now that the rat goblin was dead. And so he knew that if he went to his own village, there would be enough food for him. And he walked back toward his own village. And when he got there, everyone was overjoyed to see him. They had a big celebration to welcome him home. Now they say that Seishu lived a long and happy life in that village. And he did become a famous artist. He would draw the snow-capped mountains. He would draw the birds and flowers and trees. And he would draw the people working in the rice fields. But every day, no matter what, he was always certain to draw at least one or two cats. Cats, cats, cats. Cats eating, sleeping, jumping, leaping. Cats, cats, cats. Cats fighting, biting, howling, yowling. Cats, cats, cats.